Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I am here with Jaclyn Semlack. She is a mind body coach, blending the practices of yoga, somatics, Reiki, and meditation and subconscious rewiring to help individuals break free from stress cycles and achieve holistic well being. Thank you for joining us today, Jaclyn.
Thanks, Anetta, for having me. So glad to be here.
Absolutely. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and your story and how you came about this career for yourself?
Good question. Well, I've always been interested in wellness. Like it's just been a part of me for a long time. I've been a yoga instructor for about 15 years now. It's just always been an integral part of my life. But I actually had a health crisis. And so I had C. diff, and that's when your good gut bacteria is gone. And it was really scary. Like, actually, by the time I ended up at Mayo Clinic, which is, if you're not familiar, very good hospital. We have it here in Minnesota and Rochester. And by the time I ended up there, the doctor said to me, "You're going to die if you don't stop the antibiotics you're on." Because what was happening, I was going to specialists, gastroenterologists, and all they could do is give me antibiotics. But antibiotics get rid of your bacteria in your gut. They're getting rid of the bad, but they're also getting rid of the good. And C. diff is when you have no good and you need good bacteria in your gut. So anyway, I ended up at Mayo. Thank goodness that doctor said, get off the antibiotics. And I had a fecal transplant, which is, at the time that I had that, it was like considered a little bit experimental in California. Like they thought maybe I had to do that, but I was really fortunate that Mayo was doing it. They have a poop bank actually at their clinic. They said like doctors donate whatever they, goes through like testing, and that fixed me. Like, that was enough, which is crazy. But then after that, I continued, like, I crashed and I thought I had C. diff again. I was literally like laying on the bathroom floor. I had to call the yoga studio, like, I can't come in. I don't know what's wrong with me. I go back to Mayo and the doctor's like, this is not C. diff. This is something else. And so, blood work, testing, multiple, like, couldn't figure it out for a long time, but eventually they figured out that it was mono. So I had active strain of EBV, Epstein-Barr, in my system. And anyway, ever since then, I just really always have struggled with health and I couldn't figure it out. Then years later got long COVID and that caused debilitating fatigue. And they were testing me for all sorts of autoimmune. And maybe you have, some sort of thyroid problem. Maybe you have this mold. I ended up with like mold toxicity. Like there were all these different things that were coming and my body just couldn't keep up. My immune system just couldn't handle it. And so it was years that I was trying to figure this out. And I think for me that the hardest thing was the debilitating fatigue. I was sleeping like 15 plus hours a night. I had to take a leave of absence from work. Like I could not make it through a day. And when I say I was crashing, like I was crashing at 4 or 5 p.m., I was crawling into bed and sleeping through the night. So, it just was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. I wanted to solve this. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to live my life. I didn't wanna just be going to work and then coming home and sleeping, right? Or li and like, I would, say the other thing about the debilitating fatigue is, like, I couldn't even do tasks, like, put away the dishes or, like, do my laundry. And in the past, I'd, like, experienced depression and maybe, like, struggled with, those kinds of things, like, if you have ever experienced that kind of state. And I was like, "This is not that." Like, I literally physically cannot do these tasks. It's exhausting me. So eventually, my doctor, who was so fortunate to have a doctor that was both a naturopath and an MD, said, like, she had been telling me, you need to quit your job. Like, I really think this is stress. Like, stress is impacting this. Like, this is just too much for your body. You've changed your diet, you're taking all these supplements, like, and things just aren't shifting for you. And so she recommended that. And then she also was like, tuned into like some of the long COVID specialists at the time. And she said, there's this program run by this doctor. I really think you should try it. And that program, and it's Dr. Gupta, if anyone's interested, was what led me to heal. And basically the program was nervous system regulation and brain retraining. So he calls it AIR. It's like amygdala insular retraining. And it's teaching your body, A, to calm down. Like you've been living in these survival states for so long, your nervous system is on overload. And then your brain is like causing these loops to cause your immune system to go into distress. So that's what led me to this work. I can't even believe how transformative it was, right? If you've like gone to all the specialists, paid thousands of dollars for all of these treatments, drugs, supplements, diet, and like this is what really led me to heal. Like the fatigue went away. I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. So, yeah.
That's an incredible story of how you overcame struggles, and really now you can take your struggles that you overcame and help other people with it. That's really incredible. What are some signs that someone's nervous system is dysregulated?
Yeah, I think, this looks different for everyone. But I think one of the things that's so important to note when we talk about nervous system dysregulation is how normalized stress states have become in our society. So, being busy all the time, working around the clock, eating meals while doing other things, constantly in a rush, overthinking, difficulty with sleep, weight gain, feeling overwhelmed, like all of these things that people will pin off as like, "Oh, I'm just too stressed or I'm getting old or whatever." Like it is not normal. Even with increased rates of anxiety, mental health in our society, and then chronic illness is at an all time high. All of these things are really because of a dysregulated nervous system. Like it ends up in chronic disease or chronic pain. But, the subtle signs are some of the things I said, like if you're having trouble sleeping or you're constantly overthinking or you do struggle with anxiety, if you feel like addiction, like any types of addictions are often tied back to a dysregulated nervous system.
Think I really like how you said something simple as doing things while you're eating. Because I think that also creates also a lot of stress in between, because like we want to eat, but then also do something else. And we're building so many things onto our plate instead of actually living in that present moment.
Yeah, and like I said, it's become normalized, right? Like this is just like the way people live, like eating on the run or multitasking while you're eating. Well, what's happening is you're telling your body that it's unsafe. Like you're not actually taking in your food that leads to digestion issues because you're not slowing down enough to be present with what is.
What advice would you have for people who say they don't have time to prioritize their mental health or their emotional health?
Gosh, I think my biggest piece of advice, because I experienced it myself, is that if you don't take the time now to prioritize it, it will end up in chronic illness or pain later. It might not be now or even 5 years from now, but like down the line, it's going to show up in your body if you're not processing or like really taking care of your mental and emotional health. Emotional and mental well being is directly linked to our physical well being. There is an entire field, it's called psychoneuroimmunology, that studies just this. It's the link between our emotional states, our nervous system, and our immune function. And I think as women, we think it's okay to take care of everyone else and then neglect ourselves. And I'm not talking about like simple things like, a bubble bath, although that can be a good stress relief. Like I'm talking about the deep knowledge and value of our bodies and the way they feel and not suppressing our emotions for the sake of society's expectations or keeping the peace. Like this is so critical. And yeah, I know it sounds like I don't mean to be like so stark, like to say like eventually it'll lead to chronic pain and illness, but I truly believe it will. Like, I think that, this is coming to the forefront. Like, why is there this rise of chronic disease? Why is there this rise of chronic illness? It's because we're disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It doesn't have to be in 1 year or 5 years, but I think it will eventually catch up to you, because if you're always stressed and you're always tense and like your muscles get tense, your like everything around you just adds stress. Your relationships, work, personal relationships, all of it. And eventually it will catch up and all that tension, it's not going to know what to do. And it can create a chronic illness, exactly like you said.
Yeah, it's stored right in your body and down to the cellular level. Like they are finding this now. Like people's cells are unhealthy. There's all this research out about your mitochondria health, and people's mitochondria health is not well. And it's a combination of unprocessed emotions and stress and our eating habits. Like when we talk about stress, it's not only like external things like, my job is stressful or my family life is stressful or my relationship life is stressful. Like it's also our environment. The environmental toxins have increased, the way we're living, like the lights, the artificial lighting, not getting outside in nature enough, EMF exposure. Like all of these things are stress on your body.
What are some tips and techniques or hobbies that have helped you overcome stress and to release more stress and to have more of a balanced life?
Yeah, I so when you say like tips or tricks or hobbies, like I think yoga, meditation have been just like really transformative practices for me. Like, right? I've been doing yoga for years and like I implemented meditation. Like it's not just about what are you doing, it's also about how are you living. And because my body was in such a survival state, when our bodies are in survival states, what's happening is that our brain is scanning our environment for threat, and it's perceiving things that maybe not might not seem threatening to us as threat, and then it's looping back into an activated system. So when you're living in these states, it's a lot harder for you to actually like release and process that. Now, if your nervous system is pretty regulated and you have a healthy capacity to kind of like ride that wave of that sympathetic activation and then come back down, then things like just regular exercise, breath work, meditation, those will like process for your system pretty easily. But it's when you're in these dysregulated states that you really do need the extra support and take assessment of your life, because you're going to keep looping into those stress cycles unless you can release it.
It's incredible. I like how you said that it's not just doing yoga because before all of your challenges that you've overcome, you said you were already doing yoga and it wasn't just the yoga, it's implementing it into your daily life. I think something that's really helped me is just starting my day with mindfulness. Like the
Mm.
first thing that I do when I wake up is I say positive affirmations, like it's gonna be a good day. So I'm so thankful for X, Y, and Z. And that also really helps set the tone.
Yeah, and then, so it's interesting because, like, I think there's a lot out there on affirmations and how helpful and supportive they are, and it's not just about that, right? Like, what one of the things you said you do is the gratitude piece, and they have proven by science that gratitude actually changes your cellular structure, changes your brain. It's like you're attaching it to this feeling in your body, and it's the feeling that's really transformative, right? The other thing I think that I think you bring up such a great point of first thing in the morning. What are you doing first thing in the morning? Most people are grabbing their phone and they're checking their messages, they're checking their socials, checking their email. That's immediately spiking your cortisol, causing, you're setting your day up for a stress state when you're doing that. But when you're waking up first thing and doing, your mindfulness practices or just like really being with yourself, like and experiencing those good feelings, like then you're setting your day up for success. So I love that.
Going back to the yoga that you were saying, I was when I was growing up, I was a dancer, and I remember I would always be in dance class, whether it was ballet, modern jazz, whatever. But I was there every single day, multiple hours a day. And my teachers would be like, "Oh, you should try yoga to release stress." And I remember I would do yoga, but it wasn't releasing the stress because I was still carrying it mentally, or I was still carrying it when I was in yoga. I didn't even know how to relax. I was doing the movements, but I couldn't relax. What are some tips that you would give to
Mm.
people who want to do those practices and really teach them how to release their thoughts.
I think that's so powerful. Yeah, because I think a lot of people that are like living in these stressed out states or like looping thoughts in their mind, right? Overthinking or anxiety type states, like yoga, meditation are challenging. It's because you're in an activated fight or flight state. So often you need something different to release that. And yoga actually is a powerful tool to release that. But I totally understand that experience of like, but the thoughts are still looping through my mind. I think breath work is really a powerful tool. Like I think people who are, constantly overthinking, part of what's happening is they're disconnected from their body. And so there's got to be this way to connect back to the body. And sometimes you need a practitioner, like a somatic therapist to work with you because it's your body might need something specific. And there's so many different forms of yoga, right? So like one type of class might not be the right class for what you're experiencing in your body. And in fact, might further dysregulate you. Like there's some pretty high intensity forms of yoga that at certain times in my life were actually increasing the stress in my system rather than releasing the stress in my system. So yeah, I would say I think A, working with an experienced practitioner, and then B, the breath, like being able to really tune into the breath. And again, a practitioner can help people who struggle to do that. Because, I have lots of friends that's like, well, I can't, like that's so hard for me. I can't lay down and meditate. And I would also say, the titration of it, like small doses. So, like doing a 1 to 2 minute meditation. Can you follow the sensations in your body for those 1 to 2 minutes? Okay, now let's increase it to 5. I also think that, like, guided meditations are really helpful because you're listening to that voice, right? That is helping you, just keep reconnecting, right?
Yeah. Something that has helped me with like really like regulating my thoughts is listening to like positive things when I sleep. Do you ever do that or do you recommend like your clients to do that? Like whether it's like a sleep meditation or something along those lines?
Yes, binaural beats, meditations, like those are so helpful because what happens is it helps your body it helps your body sink into a theta wave state. And when you're in a theta wave state, that's like a really deep state of relaxation, your subconscious mind can actually take in the suggestions and be relaxed enough to like unwind. So, yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice.
It's amazing how it all starts with the subconscious mind and then it all goes in. So it's like really important what we're putting into our minds.
Yeah, and I do think it's not just the mind because there's a lot of mindset work out there. And our subconscious mind is actually our brainstem. It's the reptilian part of our brain, and that's tied to your vagus nerve. And that's your body, right? So like there's this mind body link and there's this loop that I just think is so important because I think there's a lot of people who do try like the positive affirmations and, I'm trying all this mindset work, but they still can't shift. Well, that's because there might be something really living in your body. If you've had an experience in childhood that caused your body to do that brace, like you mentioned that earlier in the episode, like the tension in your body, well, that's like an armor of protection that your body knows and is familiar. And it's going to keep doing that. It's going to keep looping that. So it's both, the subconscious mind that needs to be addressed, but it's also these stuck trauma or emotions that's living in our body and our cells.
Do you think that if having unhealthy relationships or toxic relationships around us help play a role in carrying stress in our body?
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, it's one of the number one things that's going to maintain your stress states or serve you and to release your stress states. Like our body is meant for connection. When we experience a stressor, kind of like a little bit of the science that happens is what our body first does is it looks for connection. So if you think of like a little baby, who's crying, first they're looking to like be soothed, right? And if they don't get that connection, then they escalate into protection mode. They try to self-soothe. right? And if they don't get that, then they go into ejection. And that's when the fight or flight states activate. So even from when we were really young, if we weren't getting that, like our systems could be wired for more stress. And that's why like some people like I always was like, why am I more stressed than, so and so? It could be linked back to childhood. And like that's just one example of an experience, right? There's lots of ways that our needs are met or not met, but back to that connection piece, like we need connection to teach our nervous systems that we're safe.
I really like how you made that point of how even when we're a baby, when we want something, obviously we can't talk or vocalize, so we cry, and we cry because we want connection. Because when you hold the baby and like rock them a little bit,
Mm.
immediately they feel the connection, they're calm. I never looked at it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually rocking is like a great somatic practice for regulation. Like it's very soothing. Like even just like you can shift back and forth, rocking chairs, like shifting your weight from one foot to the other. Like that's really soothing to your system. But yeah, if you can imagine if you're in relationships or experiencing relationships like anywhere in your world, in your work environment, in your home that are volatile, that are stressful, you're constantly giving your system that feedback and like you're looping the stress cycle. But if you're experiencing relationships that are really nurturing and kind of have that reciprocity, then your body feels safe and calm.
Well, thank you for sharing those tips. It's incredible. What are some benefits of nervous system regulation for long-term physical health?
Yeah, I think that like I said before, that eventually, if your system is in chronic dysregulation, it leads to disease. And I say dis-ease, right? We think of it as disease, but it's like actually your body, your mind body connection is broken in some ways. Your physical health is directly tied to your nervous system. And when you're living in survival states, your body is pumping out stress hormones. And if you've been there long enough, your body is shutting down processes like digestion to conserve energy. It's your body's way of keeping you safe. It's an evolutionary response that's a good thing. But unbeknownst to us, these stuck states of stress and the protection that our body engages in can lead to chronic illness, pain, and disease. So we need to have healthy nervous systems in order to prevent these things. And a healthy nervous system will also, allow you to have increased capacity to handle life stressors. Like Dr. Albert Wong, I love how he describes it. He talks about being able to ride the wave. Like we will throughout the day obviously get into activated states. Like it's just a natural part of what happens in our experience. But what we want is to be able to come back down into those states of regulation. But a lot of us are getting stuck. And if you're stuck in fight or flight for too long, then you go down into hypoarousal, and that's when you experience those shutdown states.
Can you go a little bit into Reiki and explain what that's like?
Yeah, Reiki. Okay, so Reiki is an energetic healing, and I actually blend Reiki with somatics. So typically, when you go to a Reiki healer, they're working with your energy. And it's mostly the practitioner doing the work. But when I work with clients, I like them to be active participants. And I think somatic processing sometimes can feel a little bit scary to people. It's scary to go into those experiences that have caused stress and to try to release them. So Reiki really allows the client to relax, to get in a fully like deep relaxed state, right? That theta wave state that I talked about. And then how I kind of weave the somatics into the Reiki experience is that I'm active with that person. I'm watching their body and tuning into like my intuition for subtle cues of like what needs to come up and out, or what do we need to work with here in order to integrate some experiences into the body. So for example, if I'm noticing like tightness in the chest, or the client, I'm asking them to scan their body and like tune in, what subtle sensations are you feeling? That also helps the client, right, start to notice their body sensations more and more. And if they say, I feel a tightness in my chest, then we work with that. We bring the breath into those spaces. I do some like helpful opening and closing to help expand and contract. That's helping get rid of shame states, for example. It's helping expand the breath into that area. Breath, like shallow breathing, is often a sign of a dysregulated nervous system. So the somatic Reiki can be such a beautiful tool for our client to experience deep relaxation, but also to start releasing and noticing the way their body is experiencing stress and maybe shift, next time they're experiencing that to be able more mindful of what's actually happening. Is my breath getting more shallow in this state? Like, how can I expand it or tune into that? Is my heart racing? Like, how can I give my body the cue, the physiological cue that it's safe?
So it's a completely a holistic route, and you tie in the Reiki with the somatics, and you really try to find the root on where it's coming from versus just saying, "Oh, this is what's happening." You really try to find the root and calm down that nervous system to figure it out.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful experience.
How has understanding regulating your nervous system transformed your life from before you started to learn about it and to where you are now?
If you have a healthy nervous system, you're able to access your innate authenticity, joy, capacity to expand and live a healthy life. But if you're stuck in a survival state, you're actively scanning your environment for threat and you cannot actually access your innate whole self. Like you shut down your intuition. And I struggled for such a long time. Like I talked about how, I had depression and really even with that experience, like I knew that what I didn't really. Like I'm like I don't think that I actually have depression. Like there's something else here. Like in my gut deep down I knew, but I couldn't access like my inner knowing. And I didn't know why, right? Like I was constantly on this search. Like first I was on a search for happiness and then I was on a search for health and healing. And when I found this, it unlocked so much for me. It not only like transformed my physical health, but it also transformed my ability to make choices and decisions that aligned with who I really was and always wanted to be. Things became clear and I could finally follow my intuition, my inner knowing without feeling stressed or uncertain.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all those tips. I think it's something that I learned once upon a time is that when you go into situations with more peace and more clarity, they go with more ease and they go more smoothly. But like you were saying, we are constantly tensing up and holding that stress in our body. Things are not clear. You make decisions you probably don't want to make, and things just get kind of rocky. So I think it's super important to really learn where it's coming from, like where your stress is coming from, and learn techniques how to break free from those cycles.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so important. What you brought up is like, it doesn't have to be hard, right? For a long time, it was so hard. When you're living in this cycle of stress, everything feels harder. But when you aren't, when you're not in a survival state, like truly everything feels easier.
Exactly. I remember I was in this relationship and we were together for at least 3 years, and I always felt like I was in survival mode. It was either fight or flight, and it was survival. And I was carrying so much stress in my body that I wasn't until I left. I remember I just packed up my stuff and I left. The second I walked out that door, I felt all the weight fall off my shoulder. And it was crazy. I didn't even do that much. All I did was decide I want better for myself. There's better out there. And I just felt that weight fall off my shoulder. And that's when like the healing actually started and all the stress was slowly fading away.
Yeah, it has to slowly unwind from your body. And like often we get to that point of like enough, right? Like we finally are like enough. And it is an active decision that we have to make. Some of us, the decision happens to us, like, right? It's the illness. It's something that's like takes your body out. And what I wish for people is that they don't have to get to that point, right? That when they're living in these stress states that are subtle that I talked about earlier are normalized in a society, like always being busy, for example. If we can unwind from those now, we don't have to reach those break points.
Exactly. It's crazy because like us as humans, like we're gonna work, 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 or we're just gonna push, push, push until we have to take a step back, until we get faced with a challenge or an obstacle to make us want to take a step back and be like, is this really what I want? Is this really how I want to continue to feel? It's incredible. So, well, thank you so much for sharing all of your tips and your journey and your story with us today. Where can people find you, support you? If they're local to you in Minnesota, where can they take classes from you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Jaclyn Semlack Wellness. I also have a podcast on Spotify and Apple. It's called Still Within. I'd love if you tuned into that. And if you catch me on Instagram, say hi and say you found me through this podcast. I love to hear. And then in locally, there's a lot of pop-up events that I'm part of, but I actually teach online. So if you're interested too, send me a message. I teach on Sunday mornings via Zoom. So I'd love to have you in my yoga class as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'll have all of your information linked in the description below so people can stay in tune. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Anetta. Loved being here today.